Welcome to another edition of the Cultivating Tradition podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined by a fantastic practitioner, Alex Brazkiewicz. Alex is an acupuncturist, tuina practitioner, osteopath, more recently a yoga practitioner and teacher as well, interested in rehabilitation. But I think something that's very interesting about Alex is his background and where he comes from. Alex was a policeman and then a paramedic, and then became interested in all of these different healing arts like acupuncture and tuina. So I think in many people's minds, people think of acupuncture as something very abstract, and they don't actually appreciate how much of a real and tangible thing it is that's reproducible and gets very consistent results. So I think people might be interested to hear about your journey into acupuncture from something which couldn't be more real and immediate than being a paramedic going into these arts. So yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you for inviting me, by the way, Alex. Good name, that, Alex. I first started being interested in medicine in my teenage years, to be fair, looking after my mother as a sole carer, because she had kidney failure. So I was the sole carer while my father was away. But then I met my martial arts teacher, Japanese martial arts, Mike Finn Sensei, and I went to Japan training with him and his teachers out there, and he introduced me to Namakoshi Shiatsu. Now in Japan, Namakoshi Shiatsu uses the Western view of the body to actually apply Shiatsu. So that was the only one that was actually applicable within the NHS in Japan at the time, whereas the one that used a traditional Chinese medicine that's more flavorful in the West was not used so much in Japan, well, at least not within the medical healthcare system. So I learned Namakoshi Shiatsu then, and through my martial arts training, I became very, very much interested in body work as such. But then I took a slight detour, joined the police force, as you say, for 7 years, spent most of that time in Peckham and East Dulwich, and then took a slight career change to join the ambulance service in London, where I served both in Deptford, Forest Hill, Lee, and finally 7 years night duty, permanent nights at Waterloo, which was the busiest station in the world. And I also started my first aid training company alongside. As that grew, it gave me time to take a look at where I wanted my future to be and turn time to go back to school. So in my 40s, I went back to university to study acupuncture, and then qualified from College of Integrated Chinese Medicine up at Reading. Then I did a postgraduate course in tuina, and I was quite fortunate at the time. I met Jason Robertson, who was the co-author of the Applied Channel Theory book and his pre-book tour. And he introduced me to his teacher, Professor Wang Jui, in China. So I did a month's study in China that really got me into channel theory and channel palpation. And the next 5 years, I then went back to China or studied with them in Europe for at least a month a year over the next 5 years. And also did a month internship at the Tuina Hospital in Beijing.
Wow.
I also was teaching tuina at the City College of Acupuncture down in London. But in China, tuina is a 6-year full-time doctorate level program. So when I said to my then wife, "Can I go to China for 6 years?" She said, "Yes, but don't bother coming back." So I looked, because I really was interested in musculo-skeletal. That's sort of my passion and always has been. And so I looked at something and in China, tuina, they blend both Western medicine, orthopedic medicine, with channel theory, with Zhang Fu, with the whole thing. So when I came back to the UK, I looked for something that could give me that kind of insight. Because where Western biomedicine comes in well is looking at the minutiae, not so much of the big picture, whereas Chinese medicine very much the big picture, not necessarily the minutiae in my experience, especially with musculoskeletal work. So I looked at what I could study, and there was nothing at that kind of level except for osteopathy. And the osteopathic principle is looking at the entire body, the fascial system, which coincides quite well with the Jing, the channel sinew meridians. So I went back to university in my 50s for another 5 years, and then qualified. So now I sort of blend osteopathy with Chinese medicine with acupuncture and tuina in a sort of integrated approach, really.
So we have a mixture of practitioner viewers and public viewers. I think practitioner and public alike, you will have heard a lot of different names being thrown out there. Some of them are very clearly, you know, of disciplines that are very clearly in the Western framework. Some are very clearly in the Eastern framework. Some are somewhere in between, like osteopathy. And I think that something that I've really appreciated about your work is your ability to see things from a wide range of different perspectives and benefit from them too. In a moment, we'll get onto how you see how they all fit together. But I'm just interested in this idea of going from being a day-to-day paramedic, where, I mean, maybe you disagree, but things are maybe more or less clearly defined. You're trying to keep someone alive, which is a different challenge from trying to improve someone's chronic health condition, for example. But also, it is more clearly defined. Are they alive at the end of your, your work, effectively? And did you find that a challenge, embracing some of the more traditional aspects of things as you went through, or did you go on a bit of a journey and appreciation of the depth and usefulness of them?
Yeah, I mean, with paramedic work, it is, you've got to make instant decisions on in a lot of cases on what you've got in front of you. So you haven't got much time to ruminate, etc. You've got to make, it's not always, people think paramedics are all life and death. It's not life and death all the time, but you've got to make clinical decisions in a quite short space of time on the limited information that you have. And what I did appreciate is that a lot of the underlying chronic conditions that we see on a regular basis are lifestyle related. It really made me appreciate how much lifestyle in general can actually, if not cure, at least prevent or and sometimes reverse a lot of these chronic conditions. So that did give me, as time grew on, the fact that I think Dr. Dean Ornish, I'm a great fan of, he's a professor of physiology in Harvard, and he's done a lot of research on lifestyle medicine. He said he often uses a cartoon where he's got loads of doctors mopping up the floor and the tap's still overflowing. So why keep on mopping up the floor? Why not switch off the tap? So that sort of made me appreciate, or he turns it faucets in American, but that made me sort of appreciate the fact that yes, a lot of the conditions we have, if you can help someone to prevent the spread of the condition, then hopefully, I think that was brought out very much in COVID, where I think a lot of people prior to COVID, I think, once they abused their bodies, they weren't appreciative of how much they need to look after themselves and think the NHS is going to fix them either with medication or whatever. And then when it found it couldn't do that, I think it was a bit of a big culture shock. And I think there is a big increase in interest in looking after yourself now, especially post-COVID. But yes, I mean, it was a terrifying time for everyone. And I think there is a game change. In 2022, I attended the biggest ever lifestyle medicine conference at the Queen Elizabeth Centre in London. Over 1,000 people every day tipped up there, and over half were GPs. They weren't happy with the current system. So I think there is a groundswell of movement of other therapies to actually help people along that path.
I think that's such an incredible point. Firstly, there's more of a connection that we think between the kind of chronic side of things and the emergency side of things, and I think that's often neglected. And COVID was a really interesting one. I think in my discussion with a lot of practitioners, there was this sense that COVID found your weakest spot, and when we've been treating a lot of long COVID, for example, in our clinics, the personalized diagnosis that we have is incredibly useful in getting to the root of how long COVID is expressing in different people, because it's very varied. I think people will absolutely acknowledge that. And I think that the lifestyle medicine aspect is really interesting too. We have one of our BXC members did some research to show that if you go and see a traditional practitioner, a traditional acupuncturist, you're more likely to make a positive lifestyle change, irrespective of whether they get you better or not, which they most of the time do. You're more likely to make a positive lifestyle change than if you go and see a conventional medical practitioner, which again is something that isn't captured in the word acupuncture necessarily, but it's captured in this deeper traditional understanding that we're trained in, and the depth and nuance, and the advanced nature of many of these traditions. Even though they're old, something can be old and advanced at the same time, something hard to get into our mind. Maybe you could say a little bit about what the applied channel theory is from Wang Jui for people who are interested in that. And
well, to go back to what you were saying before, and there is this this preconception that everything modern is good. So let's face it, throughout 2,000-3,000 years plus of history, the most intelligent people in the world were the healers, the doctors, the medicine, from whatever discipline you come from, whether it's Western, Chinese, Indian, Ayurvedic. So by throwing out the baby with the bathwater, you're then saying those thousands of years of intelligent people didn't have a clue, which is completely to me that's completely wrong. And I think the study, just because we don't know it doesn't mean it's not true. Lack of proof is not. What's it the old saying? There's something on the lack of proof doesn't mean that it is not there in effect. And I think the study of epigenetics, where the environment of which will tend to switch genes on and off, is very much coming to the fore now. So you've got the fact you might be genetically predisposed to a condition. It's just like a loaded gun. They're firing it is the environment they're in, and that very much so. And I think a lot of work by Helena Langevin in America, very much as a professor of physiology, integrative medicine at Harvard and also at Vermont Medical School. She's done a lot of primary research about how acupuncture seems to work from a Western biomedicine point of view. And I think that the fact that when you put a needle in someone, and you actually manipulate the fascial network, it causes upregulation of gene expression and that can actually all have effects all around the body. And I think Professor Bernstock, who was a professor at UCL, he first hypothesized that you put a needle in and it actually ATP, which is a molecule of the currency of energy, is in fact a signaling molecule as well. And it was poo-pooed in the 1970s, and I think in the 1990s they actually found receptor sites for ATP as a signaling molecule. So it's not just energy signals, which is what we say in Chinese medicine from the get-go. And I think Dr. Miller, who's a doctor in America, he has a very, very good YouTube section where he actually explains Chinese medicine to Harvard medical students, and he sort of explained that this is a scientific approach that goes back thousands of years. And I think, I'm quite fortunate. Professor Wang Jui, he's one of a kind, really. I mean, he was the first ever graduating class at TCM in China. Prior to the Chairman Mao bringing everyone together, you worked under a lineage teacher, so you learnt their style, and that was it. What Chairman Mao did, he said, right, bring it, because he wanted to make a medicine, a cheap medicine, applicable to everyone, because Western medicine wasn't available in those days, so at least not in the numbers that's required to supply all of China. So he put all the doctors at the main universities, Beijing, Nanjing, etc., Shanghai. And so at that time, you're able to study classical Chinese medicine under all the different teachers. Then during the Cultural Revolution, when those teachers were then imprisoned or whatever, he was then sent out into the rural country where he was treating up to 100 patients a day. So having exposure to classical Chinese medicine together with the spiritual side as well, and then having decades of treating literally hundreds of patients every day on a daily basis and seeing what worked and what didn't, gave me a very, very unique perspective. And I think during the 70s, 80s and 90s, when it became more scientific in China, they're sort of realising that by forgetting the spiritual side and the emotional side, they've lost something. So they're trying to reclaim this before a lot of the old guys sort of pass on. And so he's very, very into that, and also channel palpation, the fact you can palpate the channels and it gives you information. And so rather like pulse and tongue that we classically use in history taking, another dimension to increase your diagnosis. The more diagnostic tools you have, the better. And what I was going to say also, even from Western medicine, 50 years ago, it wasn't medical science as a medical art, because it's all right having these prescriptive guidelines, but we're not all the same. Everyone's different, and you need to be able to adapt the guidelines to be able to react to your person's individuality, and that's where Chinese medicine, I think, really has got a long history of that. And yeah, so he uses channel palpation as a diagnostic tool for internal conditions as well as musculo-skeletal conditions. And I was quite very fortunate. He's now passed on, unfortunately, to study with him over those sort of 5 years. Not all time 5 years, about a month a year for those 5 years. I was able to, quite privileged to study, and I'm quite fortunate. I seem to be quite lucky in life. I seem to meet the right people. My martial arts teacher, he was acknowledged by the Guinness Book of Records, the highest grade expert of Japanese martial arts out of Japan. Professor Wong Jui and Jason Robertson. I was able to meet and study under Aria Nielsen Gua Sha and studied her full diploma course and able to assist her in a practical session. So I think very, very lucky and fortunate to actually meet all these great people. And that sort of informed me the way that I treat patients, really.
If you've been watching some of our previous podcasts, we've had interviews with Cinzia Scorzon and Volker Scheid, who both did field work in China, interviewing people who were in different stages of kind of more recent Chinese history, were instrumental in either continuing various lineages or in developing that standardization process that you were talking about in that Dr. Wang Jui was involved in. And so just it's a nice reference point to our previous podcasts. So I think this is a really interesting area, and in a number of the different discussions we've had, we're trying to address the idea that Chinese medicine itself is very varied, has a lot of different lineages and styles. It's not a uniform thing. And one of the approaches to that, there are various different approaches. You could choose one style and you can deepen into it, and you can see the world through that style. It's very legitimate. You can endlessly deepen into a style. Another approach is to look at a number of different styles and a number of different approaches and see where they converge, see where they don't overlap as well, and start to use a more integrated model of understanding, which is a very interesting way to look at it, because you can start to learn things about one approach from the perspective of the other and vice versa. That's definitely been your approach to things. I was just thinking maybe you could say something a little bit about that, and maybe you could let the listeners know about how you might approach treating, for example, a painful shoulder from those multiple different angles, so they can have an idea of what actually happens in the clinic, what's the actual concrete thing that you do, and the way you see it.
Well, even from a Western medicine point of view, you go back 50 years, 60 years, 80% of your diagnosis was through talking, touching, palpation, etc. And you only went for imaging to confirm your suspicions. Now it's sort of flipped the other way, and a lot of it, they won't do anything unless you've been imaged first, which is a bit sort of a reversal. The start off is, I like when the patient comes in with a shoulder pain, the first thing I do is to put them at ease, rather than put in my thoughts, I'd ask them, tell me how I can help you. So you can usually gain what their presenting complaint is to start off with. I then take a full, I start off doing an initial screening exercise to make sure I don't have to refer someone on, so cardiovascular, respiratory, etc., to make sure there's nothing that needs referral on to another healthcare practitioner. What I then go, I say to them, well, I'm going to go into, from a Chinese medicine point of view, more into your lifestyle, because things like diet, sleep, bowels, bladder, all those will have an effect, even from a Western medicine point of view, on inflammation. So they can usually equate to that. So lifestyle is a general an idea. Also from the Chinese medicine point of view, I go through the 10 questions, get an idea of what's any underlying Zhang Fu problems, and also just the general demeanour, the chi of themselves, whether they're bright or whether they're quite deficient, etc. You get an idea. Then I say to them, what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at your tongue, check your pulses, but also examine your channels, because again, I use that as a diagnostic tool very much so, as a broad overview on the state of the organs of the body. Then I'll then go more in depth into the presenting condition. So I'll go more in depth into asking questions specifically about the shoulder, where it is, where the precise pain. First, Professor Wong was saying, he cited a story where a friend of his went for treatment and he's got lower back pain, so he went through the prescriptions of points, no change, came back again, prescription points, no change, and then local points around there, and on the fourth time the person came back is, why are you needling me here? Why are you needling me there? My pain's there. People's perception of their back ranges from up here to down there. So just saying lower back pain, get them to point where the pain is, because where you think their back is and where they think their back is might be two different things. So I'll get them to the site. When did it start? Again, as far as acute conditions happening recently, if someone's bent over and picked something up and feel their back goes, for example, you know what's happened. But someone's got a long-term shoulder pain that might have developed over 5-10 years, trying to figure out what the cause is, you may never know. So you may have to see what things are maintaining, like their posture, etc., their work, whether they're sedentary, whether they're moving around, etc. So things like that, how to describe the pain, whether it's sharp stabbing or deep and achy. Whether site of the pain, I've got an idea of, so if someone's got pain here, I've got an idea of what channels I'll be thinking about, what's going through there. So I'm mentally taking that on board. So things like severity, any radiating symptoms, so any pins and needles, which from a Chinese medicine point of view might be blood deficiency, or it might be some nerves coming from the neck. I need to rule those in and out. And there's quite a good correlation with the channels and the dermatomes from a Western medicine and a Chinese medicine point of view. And I like, because of research, we like numbers, so on a pain scale of 1 to 10, it's very subjective, but as long as they keep to the same levels, then that's it. So a really in-depth deep dive into the history. I'll then want to examine what channels are going through there. So let's say, for example, you've got pain here, you've got probably the lung, large intestine, the sanjiao and the small intestine channels all going through there. So which ones do you go through? Now, Chinese medicine has a good take on this, because each of the points, the 5 transportation points, the Jingwell, the Ying Spring, the Shu Stream, the Jing River and the He Sea, have different properties. Now, the Shu Stream points, which is the third one in, its main property is to treat pain in the joints. So what I tend to do is I tend to press quite firmly. Well, first of all, I'll get the patient to do any range of motion testing. So they might say they can do this on here, perfectly okay, but on here they can do that okay, but they can only sort of move so far. So I'll get an idea of where their restrictions is. Then I'll press on the shoestring point, and I might find lung, there's nothing. Large intestine, they say, oh, that hurts. Then I press on the sanjiao, and well, that's really tender. I then press on their firmly and get them to raise their arm. If it increases their range of motion, I know that's a channel I'm going to be treating on that day, which could change on the next treatment. So use press on those points to differentiate which channels you're going to be using.
So just for the people who might not be practitioners here, when we talk about channels, sometimes they're referred to as meridians. They are the lines that you see on the diagrams or the models that go up and down the body. There are 6 channels that go to the hands and 6 that go to the feet, and they go to the different through the fingers, and they go to different trajectories through the body. So those trajectories will go through, for example, different parts of the shoulder. Further down, the point might be here, but the part of the shoulder might be the rear of the shoulder or the front of the shoulder. And then there's 5 special points along those lines, which are called the shoe points, the 5 shoe points, which have different properties, and they all are below the elbow. And
the knee for the...
And the knee, that's right. And so one of the things that Wang Jui really focuses on, which is really, really interesting. Firstly, he says that if you feel along those channels, we call it palpating, you can actually use them to diagnose what's happening in the body, which is really, really interesting. And actually, when you start to feel people's forearms and hands, they're different. You start to feel things, oh, that's quite interesting. And then the second thing is that then you can, understanding the properties of these different points, you can actually use them for treating pain, for treating musculo-skeletal conditions. And you were talking about the shoestring point, which is the 3rd point along tends to be not only something which is good for diagnosis, but it's also something that's good for treatment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, going back to, I mentioned Professor Longeman, she did a lot of research. Now, bearing in mind in the 1990s when she first just started research in acupuncture, it was a bit of a way out thing. Why would someone that's highly respected want to do research in acupuncture? Moved 20 years, I think she's the highest paid researcher in Vermont Medical School. But she initially created when you put a needle in an acupuncture point, and start manipulating it, you get a sensation going up and down. She wanted to investigate what was there. So she found out that initially she did ultrasound scans and found that where the acupuncture points are, there's about 80% correlation with a fascial network. The fascia that surrounds all the muscles and tissues of the body meets, much greater than pure chance. So what she then did, she invented a machine to measure the resistance when you put a needle in, and measured at the points, so off the points, there's about 30% difference. But when you start manipulating the needle, the grab of the point on the needle, which a needle grab, was about 167% more than not on acupuncture points. She then did, I think it was some experiments on mice where they actually put the needle in and then started twisting and rotating the needle, and the needle almost latched on to the fascia, rather like candy floss. You'd rotate the candy, so it then distorted the fascial network, which then causes gene expression or upregulates gene expression of molecules, etc., and that causes signaling to go up the system. So from a Western biomedicine point of view, where those points are where the fascial network comes together, and you can address. So from a Chinese medicine point of view, where those points are, the jia, the nodes, the pauses where the things happen, the spiritually enters, exits, and enters, moves, and exits. And they're not the same as skin, flesh, tissue, or bones, but are there the spaces in between? And that's what you're feeling for when you feel for the points. But yes, so there is a nice correlation between the two. So yes, so I would normally do. I differentiate the channels I want to be doing, but then I'll put my Western medical head on, and then think, okay, so is this got radiating symptoms, pins and needles? Is it coming from the neck? So there are certain diagnostic tests I would do to see if it's coming from the nerves, because if it is coming from the nerves, if you just treat here, you're missing half the game. You want to treat on the neck as well. I treat the neck and shoulder like I do the lower back and legs. They are just one unit as such. So treating one without the other is not good. And so that's the start of it. Then you, from a Western medicine point of view, you've got 4 muscles that sort of lift the arm up, but there's about 11 that resist down. And the way the muscles work is, if I tell my arm to do this, the muscle here to contract, the spinal cord tells the muscles here to stretch. If it didn't do that, we're fighting it all the time. And then when I tell my triceps to contract, it does this. The spinal cord tells this muscle to relax. So they work symbiotically together. What's in the yin yang of muscle work. So if I tell this muscle to contract and something's happened here that it's locked, it can't actually relax any further, it's acting as a brake. So this is acting as a brake, so this is overworking. It's almost like driving the engine with the brakes on. The engine's going to explode, so the pain's here, but the cause might be here. So by using manual muscle testing and range of motion, I can figure out, well, there's about 14 muscles that will actually could act as brakes. But for example, if I can do this, then all the muscles behind that could acting as brakes are working, because if they weren't working, I wouldn't be able to move forward. So that then leaves only 3 muscles to try and release. So then I want to try and release the brakes. Which I know that you studied under Phil McQueen, who again is another great teacher that sadly passed away. They released the brakes principle. And then I use manual techniques, Golgi tendon organ stretches, which when I went to China, the Tuina hospital, they said when I demonstrated this, it's a Li-Fa technique. I thought, I don't know what you call it in Chinese, but they said that's Li-Fa. So again, you can't teach the Chinese much about body work. They've been doing it for thousands of years. They might not know why it works. So from a Golgi tendon organ stretch, you're signaling the spinal cord to say that the muscle's overworking, so it will tend to relax that muscle, but they know that it worked. So I will tend to release the brakes. And if I find a brake that's released and increases their range of motion, they're going to need rehabilitation. They're going to need to stretch. They're going to need to look at their posture, because otherwise it's going to come back. And that's why any treatment without some kind of rehabilitation work, whether it's yoga, tai chi, qigong, you want to actually some kind of movement therapy to actually get things moving again, you're sort of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So you need to build in a rehab program as well. So then I got an idea of range of what could be acting as brakes. Then I will tend to, so I'll then use the distal points, the points down here,
Yeah.
to manipulate the chi, the signalling up the body. But around here, where the pain is where the stagnation is. That's when you'll be treating locally as well. I'm a very great fan of moxa and which is the herb that you put on the needle or on the body itself to warm the area, and also acupuncture. People think electroacupuncture is a modern concept. I think the first ever electro machine was in the 1700s in Japan. So it's been around for a few hundred years.
That is modern by the Chinese standards,
modern, yeah, it is,
but not by our standards. Yeah.
But then once I do that, I will then use some kind of cupping or gua sha, a very great fan of gua sha, to help move the stagnation. Because even from a Western medicine point of view, if you've got someone who's, for example, commonly you'll find shoulder injuries are quite often coincide with a very head forward kyphotic posture with people on their phones all day long. It affects the structures around here because the muscles here are needed to actually relax to allow the shoulder blades to move.
Yeah.
So if these are tight, they're locked long. Try and stretch them any further, you're going to cause pain. And likewise, when muscles are locked, you get poor blood flow to the area, poor circulation, poor chi and blood stagnation. And what you want to do, you want to clear that. Now, from Aria Nielsen's background, whereas acupuncture moves chi and blood, whereas chi moves blood, it does not move blood stagnation. To move that, you need to actually get hands-on. Things like cupping, gua sha, moxa herbs. So you need to get your hands on to get really be effective in moving that stagnation there, and then they'll be given some prescriptive exercises to do afterwards. So that's my blending of sort of Chinese and Western medicine.
And so I think, for some people, that might be quite an interesting view in that we're looking through, we can look through multiple prisms at the same time, and they can inform each other. So you can, that research with the fascial network, the fascia is this connective tissue that connects everything up within the body. And kind of helps to maintain the structure of the body, how the body holds itself. That can interface with an acupuncture point, and it can connect the action of that point to multiple other places in the body. But understanding that, you can then connect up the traditional side with the modern side. And you can, the main thing is you can get people better. and you can...
I think it was Royston Lowe, who was an acupuncturist and an osteopath. He was that first generation, together with JR and Van Buren, and went out to China. But he said in his book on musculo-skeletal conditions, the idea is not to treat them separately, but to integrate and be quite pragmatic and actually use what works in effect. And that's what Professor Wong would always say. He was always open to new ideas. He would learn stuff even in his 70s and 80s. So, this is a new way of looking at things. So even after 60 years of clinical practice, he would always go back and mine the classics. He would also learn stuff from he was very interested in the fascial network, in the development of the fetal development. He was very interested in how that equates to the membranes of the body from a Chinese medicine point of view. And whether you believe in this idea of life force and energy or not, there is something physical you can actually get a result from a Western medicine bio point of view. But also there's this, and a lot of the traditional, whether it's Indian, Chinese, and I think even probably the traditional Western medicine, you go back, to Galen, etc. The idea of this life force, this energy in the body that makes us different from that, for example, this moving, we're all energy as such, but we have a life force with us, and it's that life force that can actually, be affected by acupuncture, by actually having hands on. One thing that really distresses me, you see so many, whether it's from a Western medicine point of view, they will not touch patients. You get to a lot of, not everyone, but a lot of physiotherapists will just actually do movements from not even hands on. There's an act of touching the patient, the exchange of energy between the two, which I think quite sad. A lot of patients that come to me have never been touched by a Western medical practitioner, and just the act of just actually appreciating that their shoulder's there and to do that, they really appreciate that so much. And this idea of a life force of an energy that makes them, when that life force is finished, you die. And it's that we can manipulate with acupuncture, with tuina, with lifestyle, very much so. Even just people, and again, this Western medicine split of mind, body and spirit just doesn't exist in Chinese and Western medicine. By affecting the body, you'll affect the emotions and the mind. By affecting the emotions, you'll affect the body.
100%.
It's the same thing.
That's fantastic to hear. So we're going to have a lot more conversations coming with the Cultivating Tradition podcast. But I just wanted to say thank you, Alex. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.